I grew up on a farm just outside of Palm Beach County in Florida. My great-grandpa built the house, and it's been passed down to my family ever since. I've since moved out, but for reasons greater than wanting to just leave the family business. The farm is actually really successful, and at the time of this happening, my parents were talking with several major wholesale marketers and retailers. They'd occasionally go away for a few days to meet with them and discuss business plans, so I'd be asked to watch the house and take care of it when they'd be gone. On this particular trip, my parents would be leaving Tuesday morning and returning on Friday night. I didn't mind being on my own, and I actually kind of enjoyed the freedom it came with. My dad hired 2 workers years ago, Ronnie and Nick, so they'd be out there almost every day from sunrise to sundown. This made my life easier, and it significantly lowered the amount of other tasks I'd be expected to do without them. They were good friends of my dad, and our family as a whole completely trusted them, as they'd never once been a problem in the several years they worked there. They were more than welcome to come inside and use the bathroom, so I was used to them coming in and out at random times of the day. So, on the day my parents left, I was in charge of the house. I spent the first day working outside for a couple hours, then spent the majority of my time playing on my Xbox in the basement. The forecast was calling for severe thunderstorms that night, so I had to go outside and bring the chickens into the barn. Around 10:30, the storm had really started to pick up, so I went upstairs to get my shoes and poncho. While I was getting ready in the kitchen, I was able to see the tractor lights in the distance out by the crops. Ronnie's job was to come back and tarp the crops that were most vulnerable to the rain, so I wasn't too surprised to see him out there this late. I went outside, rounded up the chickens, and made my way back inside the house. I headed straight back down to the basement, where I got back on my Xbox. About a half hour later, I heard the tractor engine approaching the house, so I got up and ran out to the garage to say bye to Ronnie. However, once I got to the garage, the tractor was already parked there and the room was all locked up. Almost seconds later, I got a call from Ronnie. I had my phone in my hand, so I picked it up right away. "Hey, just a heads up. While I was out by the crops, I saw a person standing on the property line staring at me. Just make sure you lock the doors to the house. They walk back into the woods, but do it just to be safe." That was the last thing I ever could have expected to hear, but I complied and double-checked to make sure the doors were locked. I thanked Ronnie for the heads up and immediately called my dad. If I'm being honest, I was pretty creeped out, and although my dad couldn't do anything, I just felt safer being on the phone with him and letting him know. I knew very well that it could just be some kids messing around, but I was also unsettled, especially since Ronnie seemed to have left in such a hurry. After talking with my dad, I calmed down a bit, and he reminded me of the several guns I had access to in the house in the case of something happening. Our conversation brought me back to my senses, and I pretty much forgot about it afterwards. Just to err on the side of caution, I grabbed a pistol out of the safe and kept it by me for the rest of the night, just so I felt safer. I ended up heading back downstairs and played online with some of my friends for a couple more hours. By the time I was done playing, it was just after 1 a.m., and I was back upstairs getting ready for bed. Once I was in my room, I shut off the lights and laid down. As soon as the lights went off, I completely froze. A small beam of light was shining through my window curtain, and the only source of light that could reach my bedroom window was the barn. I looked out the window, and to my absolute shock, the barn doors were swung wide open and the place was fully lit up. I called my dad, absolutely terrified. Nobody should have been out there this late, and I was praying that he'd tell me that Ronnie or Nick stopped back over to take care of something. But when he picked up and I asked him, he was just as shocked as I was. He immediately told me to go down and see if their cars were in the driveway, and when I looked out, I felt my stomach sink. The driveway was empty. My dad told me he was going to call Ronnie and Nick just to confirm they weren't there, and told me to keep my phone by me for when he called back. He called me minutes later, telling me that he couldn't get through to Ronnie or Nick, so they were probably asleep. I hung up and called 911, while I locked myself in my room with the pistol. I stayed on the line with the operator until the police started banging on my front door. They spent hours searching our 200-acre property, but whoever was there before was now gone. Unfortunately, I was informed by the police that the chickens in the barn were all killed, and the entire barn looked like a slaughterhouse. Canine units searched the property for any sign of where the suspect may have gone, but the few footsteps they found were washed away in the rain and therefore untraceable. To add to the eeriness of it all, the window to our second garage furthest from the house was smashed, and wet footprints were found leading to the door that connected to the inside of the house. Toolboxes were moved around, rugs were flipped over, and the lock to the door had been tampered with. It was clear that this person was looking for a key to the house, and they very well may have had even more sinister intentions. Ronnie and Nick were thoroughly questioned by the police, but they each provided a reasonable alibi. My parents and I never had a feeling that they were the culprits, and they even continued working for my dad years after that, despite the possible danger. Ever since that night, I've never felt the same being inside that house. I moved out for college my freshman year, and I've never moved back in, nor do I ever plan on doing so. I've moved on with my life, but I still can't help but think about what else that person was planning to do, knowing that I easily would have been the next target had I not been aware. I'm originally from Iowa, born and raised, but have recently moved to Sarasota, Florida with my wife. I've always vacationed to Florida ever since I was a kid, so when I got an opportunity to relocate to Sarasota for work, my wife and I were thrilled. Now that we've lived here for the past 2 years, I've started to understand why Florida gets such a bad rap for having some strange people. My job allows me to work from home on certain days, so between my wife's hectic schedule as a registered nurse and mine, one of us is usually home. On a Wednesday night, I was at home working on my laptop in our screened-in patio, while my wife was working a double shift until 7 a.m. We live on a quiet street, tucked away from the main roads in the area. The houses are decently spread out, so there's about 50 to 60 feet between the properties. The overall area is fairly underdeveloped, and the majority of land behind the neighborhood houses are marshes. I'd say we have a pretty average-sized backyard, around 6,000 square feet. Behind that, there's little to no civilization for miles behind the marsh. So, around 8:30 p.m., as I was sitting out on the patio, I thought I heard a male voice screaming in the distance. It definitely caught my attention, so I stopped what I was doing and tried to make sense of where it was coming from. The screaming lasted maybe 5 seconds, but completely stopped and went silent afterwards. Although I couldn't be sure, it sounded like it was coming from the marsh, but who would be out there? I quickly forgot about it and finished up the rest of my work, then went inside to watch TV before bed. I remember sitting there on the couch when I heard the same scream from earlier again. I muted the TV, but this time, the screaming sounded to be much closer to the house. I got up to look out the back window, but it was too dark to see past my property line, so I forgot about it again and went back to the couch. 10 minutes passed, and out of nowhere again, I heard the same scream, but each time, it sounded like it was getting closer. This time, I actually decided to investigate, because unless the guy was screaming over a megaphone, it sounded like he was right outside my house. I flipped on the lights inside the screened-in patio and walked out to scan the backyard. As soon as I walked out, I could instantly make out a male figure standing in my backyard. I reacted by screaming at him to get away, and I threatened to call the cops. However, the figure showed no reply and just stood there completely motionless like a statue. So I did exactly what I said I'd do, and I walked back inside the house to grab my phone and call the cops. As soon as I shut the door behind me, he let out another scream at the top of his lungs, probably enough to destroy his vocal cords. Something really seemed to be wrong with him, so I started getting panicked. I told the dispatcher lady that someone needed to get over here as soon as possible, explaining that there was an unstable man screaming in my backyard. She told me to make sure that all doors and windows were locked, and instructed me to find something to defend myself with in the case of a break-in. I shut off all the lights in the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the drawer, and crouched my way to the window to see if he was still outside. Now that it was dark inside my house, I had a much better view of this man. He was only wearing his underwear and was completely covered in mud and grass. He was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what it was, so I assumed it was a weapon of some sort. The dispatcher told me to lock myself in a safe room away from the windows, so I walked down the hall to my room and locked the door shut. I always thought that I'd remain calm if I were ever in a situation like this, but I was completely wrong. When you're living in the moment, knowing that your life could be on the line, I think a lot of people would be surprised at how terrifying it actually is. The lady told me that the police would be there within 10 minutes, and to stay on the line no matter what. I did exactly that, and sat up against the corner away from the windows while I waited for them to arrive. Suddenly, I began hearing a banging sound coming from the back of my house. My hand started sweating, and I gripped the knife even tighter in my hand as I listened in horror. It sounded like it was coming from the patio, and I froze, as I realized that the banging sound was from him trying to break the door down to get inside. I told the dispatcher what was happening, and she told me to stay calm and quiet, reminding me that the police were only a few minutes away, but by the sounds of it, I didn't have a few minutes. This guy literally sounded like he was throwing his entire body against the door. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a loud crash, followed by fast-paced footsteps loudly stomping inside the house. I reacted out of complete instinct. I jumped out the window and began running down the street as fast as I could, telling the dispatcher that he got in the house in between breaths. I didn't stop running until I saw a police car, and I flagged him down to stop. He immediately drew his gun on me, but I told him that I was the person who called, and I showed him the call to 911. The police arrived at the house, and I was eventually taken to the police station to talk with them. They ended up kicking down my front door, because as soon as they walked onto my property, they heard the same screams I was describing coming from inside my house. The man was found hiding behind my dresser in my bedroom with a machete, which meant that he kicked down my locked bedroom door. He was arrested and charged with several serious crimes, like aggravated burglary, possession of weapon during the commission of a crime, possession of methamphetamine, and attempted murder, just to name a few. He had no reason to attack me, and was found to be in a full-out state of drug-induced psychosis on the night this occurred. I know very well that I easily could have been killed that night, and I'm glad I made the decision to get out when I did, because otherwise, I would have been in a fight for my life. When I was in high school, I used to visit my dad every summer in Florida. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and my best friend, who I'll call Chloe, had moved into the same complex with her parents and little sister. My dad had to clean up the apartment that day, and he's pretty meticulous whenever he cleans, so he told me to go play with Chloe for a while. We decided to go swimming in the pool in the complex. Chloe's little sister just had a surgery a week prior, so she wasn't allowed to get her stitches wet, but she came along anyway. Chloe and I decided to invite another one of her friends that lived in the area at the time as well. Her father dropped her off at the pool, and we began swimming, while Chloe's little sister played on her phone. After hanging out there for a while, her little sister and I had to go to the bathroom, and the pool bathrooms were closing soon. I had warned Chloe to go before they closed them, but she waited too long, so by the time she got up to go, they were closed for the night. Since my apartment was the closest, she opted to go there, but my dad was still cleaning, and he didn't want anyone coming in, so she had to walk all the way over to the other side of the complex to use the bathroom in her house. Shortly after she left, an older couple decided to come to the pool and got in the jacuzzi behind us as we played. It was taking an unusually long time for Chloe to come back, and I started getting worried. I told Chloe's little sister and my friend to stay there, and I went to go look for her. Finally, I found Chloe walking back to the pool, wrapped in her towel, but behind her, I saw two men walking in our direction. We began walking together, but it took a good 10 minutes for us to get back to the pool, and not once did their path differ from ours. I got a really bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and we decided to pick up the pace on the way back to the pool. We got there before the men did, and I told Chloe's little sister to gather our things and go to the other side of the pool near the older couple. The rest of us jumped in the pool and swam to the deep end to get a better distance away from them. Not long after, the men walked up to the pool. They kept looking at the older couple and then us, as if they were weighing their options. They kept whispering back and forth to each other, all while continuously looking at us. Thankfully, after a tense minute, they decided to leave. I was freaked out, so I called my dad right away. The older couple next to us asked if we were okay, then asked if we had known the men, and we said no. Our parents were furious upon hearing this, and came straight down to the pool. The police were called, and the older couple waited for our parents to arrive. When the police finally came, we gave them a description of the two men. They searched the entire complex, but they couldn't find a trace of them. The police took our statements and then left, so everyone had to basically go back home. Since everyone's parents were so freaked out, no one was allowed to leave their house unattended by their parents for the rest of the summer. I never really thought about the incident after that summer, until I was a junior in high school. When I turned on the TV one night after school to watch the news, the men's faces were on the screen. They were arrested in Miami for being smugglers into a sex trafficking ring. My face grew white as I called Chloe. She saw their faces on TV shortly after and started to cry as she realized it was the same men who had stalked us, not even 2 years prior. A month later, I got a call from my dad saying that some police officers would like to talk to me, but I was already heading down there for the next summer anyway, in a couple of days. When I got to Florida, I found out that Chloe, her little sister, and my other friend had already been talked to by the police. I found out that there had been other reports around the same time that our event happened. About 17 other girls had been stalked in our area by the same 2 men, and they ended up using our statements in court to put them in jail. I'm just glad that my gut had the right feeling about those guys. If there's one lesson I took out of this, it's to always trust your gut if you feel something is wrong.